Hello, welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are speaking to the North of the Tyne Mayor, Jamie Driscoll, so we're extremely privileged to be able to have a chat with him. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Paul. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, right, I'm just going to get straight into this. What is socialism to you?
For me, socialism, all of politics is about people. You know, the world we live in is all about people. So you can talk about economic theories, you can talk about governance systems, but really it comes down to two things. Is, you know, we all work, we all need to eat, we all need somewhere to live. Is, do we organise our society and our production with people in mind and their needs, or do we organise it through some other system where making profit then kind of works and will automatically support the needs of the people? And I don't think it does. I don't think it ever has. This goes right back to Adam Smith, some people might have heard of, who's spoken about as the father of economics. And he came up with this line that it's through the invisible hand that we expect things to work. And of course it doesn't. You know, you've got billionaires in this country and you've got people who are working, sometimes doing 3 or 4 jobs, who can't even put food on the table and still have to go to food banks. So that's socialism in a nutshell. And if we organise society in that way, then we're all better off. So it's got very little to do with how the government is organised. It's got very little to do with political parties. It's to do with how we organise, how we feed, clothe, educate, all of these things that we need to do.
That's absolutely brilliant. So it's just about people. So I wonder, have you always felt like this? Has this always been something you've identified as? Have you always identified as a socialist?
Yeah, it's, I think probably, certainly since being a teenager. It's fair to say my mum was a trade unionist and she was instrumental in setting up a women's refuge in Middlesbrough. And so, when you're growing up with those kind of experiences, then it is very hard not to see the unfairness in society. And then as soon as you start to think about that, some people come to the conclusion that, oh, well, the other lot are just bastards. I'm not actually sure that's really true. Some of them definitely are. But, in my job, I have to work with Tory ministers. Some of them actually think they're doing the right thing. We just have a different set of values. And if you start from a different assumption, you're going to end up with a different conclusion. Some of them, I think, are just very selfish. But you know what? I think there's people on the Labour side who are like that as well. And there's a history of that, So you've got to, take the account for individuals. But when you start thinking about it, you think, well, will society be more prosperous if we all try and make a success of it? Or will it be more prosperous if we each try and look after our own selfish needs? And as soon as you put it like that, anyone who's ever watched a football game knows that it's when you work for the team that it works out better. The question is, how do you work for the team without some individuals cheating and working for themselves? That's why we need a tax system. We can't rely on wealthy people deciding they want to be charitable. Some will, some won't. That's why we have to have a tax system. That's why we have to rule out tax dodging. All of these sorts of things. Once we do that, we end up with the principle that if we all just pay a little bit, then we have roads and we have hospitals and we have schools and we have education. And if we hadn't had this, just recently, the track and test system, we'll put it out to one of our mates. And that's why we haven't got a working system. That's why people are still getting coronavirus and they're still dying, and loads of people can't go to work and earn a living because they've messed it up, because they operated on the principle that private profit is best. And it's not. When you organise and get people together, it works. We still need profit. Every organisation has to be profitable, even if it's not a business. You have to produce more than you consume, otherwise we run out. So it's not the principle of profit's the issue, it's why we're making a profit and who gets to control it.
I'm really interested in what you were saying there about people thinking they're doing the right thing. And this is a thing that comes up a lot when I'm speaking to socialists. So I've got a question for you here. Do you think human nature is essentially good or essentially bad?
No, I think human nature is neither. I think human nature has evolved. I respect people who have religious beliefs, and I know people also religiously active who also believe very strongly in evolution. It's not a contradiction necessarily. If you look at the history and the research on it, the basic idea that humans will if you go back to the evolution of humanity, we spent hundreds of thousands of years as groups of small hunter-gatherers, and your chance of surviving on your own is close to zero in a pre-industrial society. You need to work together, you need to hunt together, you need to use food together, you need shelter and all of these. So we are strongly dependent. There's a strong instinct to want to win the approval of others, to want to get others to approve your ideas. That's neither good nor bad. What it is it says that we are instinctively social and that we instinctively work together. Now, within that, there's always opportunities for people to lie and cheat or bully, and there's always opportunity for people to win other people around by being honourable and good and having integrity. And I think these are forces that are always in play with society. But when it comes to an economic system, there are some that work better than others.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been reading a book lately. It's Rutger Bregman, Humankind, and he actually argues that people are that their nature is good, and it's even in the bad things they do, it's actually to try and have that social interaction and that positivity and that, you know, working together attitude, you know, that's trying to please people, I suppose, has led to a lot of the negative things that have happened.
It's interesting when you look at some of the evidence that came out after the Second World War, that no matter how bad it got, you know, the very worst of the Nazi units that were responsible for the mass murders, that even there, 10% of the people who frequently volunteered for these regiments refused to participate in atrocities. You know, and you would think the pressure to do that, you know, or end up, you know, on the Russian front or execute yourself must be overwhelming. And still there, people refuse. You know, and then there's, from the Nuremberg trials, there's officers in the concentration camps who were praised by the prosecutors for steadfastly refusing to obey orders. So there is that good in humanity. But the good comes out in people when they realise they're not alone. And that's the point about us being very, very social animals, is that usually when the first person stands up and says, this is wrong, I'm going to take a stand in it, that you suddenly realise there's a lot of other people who were thinking that, but hadn't quite reached that threshold of having the bravery to do it. One brave person makes everybody else braver.
Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence to back that up, isn't there? Through like the idea of people conforming to certain behaviours, even if they don't necessarily believe in it, but once they see someone else doing it, it can be you know, very, very powerful. So I'm going to now ask you about what you are up to at the moment. So at the moment, you're the North of the Tyne Mayor, and you're a real success story for socialism electorally. Well, we aren't necessarily doing particularly well as socialists electorally in this country at the moment. But I'm wondering, how did that success come about, do you think? And then also, how do you go about implementing socialist policies within the current system?
Electoral success is a funny thing. So, you know, you've been around politics for a while, I've been around politics for a long time. And these myths develop that, you know, you must win the centre ground, you know, you must not upset this thing, you must, you know, have your glossy leaflets and things like that. And that's been blown apart by the left and the right. So if we look, Boris Johnson, regardless of what you think of him, and I'm sure most people watching this probably think similar to me and you, but there's no denying that he has been very effective at winning votes. And likewise, you know, if you look at the Labour leadership election in 2015, you know, oh, Jeremy Corbyn has no chance, let him on the ballot. You know, overwhelming, hundreds of thousands of people joined the Labour Party. In 2017, we polled way more votes than we did in any of the previous elections, going right back to, you know, pre the financial crash. And that's because people, above all, and it comes back to this social psychology, they want leaders who will stand for them. You don't want a leader necessarily who is a competent manager. You don't necessarily want a leader who sounds, you know, like they're a lawyer or a policy geek or something like that, even if that person's right. In the bandwidth you've got in political communications, what you want is, yeah, you know what, and it's just resonating with these deep parts of the brain that say, if there was a crisis, I want this person standing between me and the crisis. So that's why Johnson, for all his well-documented flaws, dishonesties, everything else, he comes across as, I'll stand and fight. Jeremy did, until, you know, a whole wave of attacks upon him undermined that from different sources. And so in the North of Tyne, I got selected despite, kind of coming from nowhere against other people, who, people with track records, who've been MEPs and council leaders and all sorts of stuff. And people backed me because I was saying, no, we won't go along with this idea that, we must have this neoliberal society where it's all about the big banks and things like that. And I said, no, we'll set up our own bank. We'll do it that way. I said, let's actually promote local businesses. Let's actually build some houses people can afford. These sorts of things. You start to push that and people said, yeah, actually, that's the bloke I want representing us. And then we did exactly the same in the public campaign. And so we had Tories just trying to get down and dirty and, followed the Tony Benn approach of never wrestle with a chimney sweep. And you rise above it, and a lot of people think, well, that's quite good, So I went to the first big hustings in the election campaign, and there was John McCabe. He was a very decent bloke, but he was running as an independent. He'd been the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the president, so very well liked. And this was a business hustings, a business meetings. A Tory millionaire who was a businessman who's in all these things. Me, labelled as a radical lefty socialist type. True, I owned up to it, and there was Lib Dem there. And so, that should have been like an away game against Liverpool, shouldn't it, really, for me? And afterwards, because I was saying to people, no, I'm going to be a small business champion, because small businesses, they suffer from big businesses not paying them. And people there, small businesses, think, yeah, actually, that's true. And so by honestly saying the problems and what you're going to do, and where you can say, and I don't have the power to fix this, but I'll still shout and make the argument, then people were coming up to me afterwards and they were saying, you know what, I'm never going to vote Labour in a national election, but I'm going to vote for you. And we had people volunteering to donate to the campaign. It was astonishing, just by being honest and standing and being willing to fight.
That's pretty impressive. The idea, but it is just being honest, because those kind of socialist policies and sticking up for small businesses, because we all care about our small businesses. A lot of socialists will only shop locally and will make those kind of decisions to try and help their communities, because they see the power of that over big business.
Well, this kind of speaks to that point you were alluding to earlier, Paul, that, are people good or bad? What is socialism? Not everybody understands it. But there's a whole number of people that I've met, who some don't vote, some vote for other parties, who share socialist values. They share this idea that we should be looking after each other. They just don't associate that with politicians. Politicians have a bad name. It's part of society almost to say all politicians are as bad as each other in order to close down various routes to social change. Oh, well, I know he says he's this, but he's just a politician. It's like saying you're just a businessman. Anybody knows that they've had good bosses and bad bosses.
So does that lead into how you're implementing these socialist systems within your role? Because we've got a very capitalist system at the moment. Yeah. So is that how you're managing to break through and managing to implement some socialist systems? Could you tell us a little bit about what those are as well?
Yeah. It's probably worth starting by saying it's been a hell of a year. I've been mayor for a little over a year. And in that time, we had a dysfunctional government. We had the Tories getting rid of Theresa May, Boris Johnson coming in proroguing Parliament. Getting to talk to ministers was pretty much impossible. And then will there be an election? Won't there be an election? Then there's an election. And while there's an election, people might not know legally, you're not allowed to make policy commitments and spending commitments that could in any way be seen to influence the outcome. And so, obviously, because my policies were similar to Labour policies, that limited it. And then just as I got my permanent staff in, because we're a brand new organisation, we're hit by coronavirus. So it's been a busy year. That said, we've done some stuff. We've got climate change teachers, or teachers getting accredited and trained to be climate change teachers at the North Point. We've put in programmes to get people who are, for example, in social housing, struggling to get into work, rather than that really oppressive benefit sanctions regime that you get through the Job Centre series. That we're helping people and giving them confidence and training to get into work. We've got control now of the adult education budget, which means we can make sure that we're supporting people in the right way to get into work. So with the virus coming along, there's a lot of people who now can, if you want to apply for a job, you've got to apply online. You can't go along for an interview for 99% of the cases. And we've got school kids unable to log in at work because some families have just one device. And if mum or dad is using it for work, the kids can't get on and do homework, and frequently they don't want to, and it's, oh, mum and dad's on it, so I won't. So we supported them. We put £680,000 into getting devices to go to people who most need them. So these are the real practical things you can do on the ground, a whole range of other things. But you're right, it's an uphill struggle, and I don't have a lot of power. There's a lot of confusion about what a Metro Mayor is. I get a small investment fund to look after the economic interests of the whole north of Tyne, and that's a big area. And what I don't do is control the councils. They continue as before. So I've got nothing to do with emptying the bins or kids in care or anything like that. So investments we've made have included things like 24 million, which is more than a year's worth of money for us, into a Green New Deal, and retraining for people coming out of fossil fuel industries to get jobs in the growth sectors of green industries like offshore wind and undersea minerals and things like that. So, you know, it's not the case that we leave anybody behind. Massively concerned about climate change, but we've got to have a just transition. And in a capitalist society, you know, you've got things like multinational corporations. You've got central government deciding almost every policy. You're very limited in what you can do, but the things you can do is a lot of the aspects of what's called community wealth building. So you can change the way procurement works so that when you buy something, or a council buys something, or a local health or university buys something, that they buy it from people who are good employers, who are taking the climate emergency seriously. The people who are locally, so it's not getting shipped halfway around the world, and so that we know it's being produced in places where there's decent conditions. And there's a whole range of things about that I could talk about for hours, but I won't. But the number one thing is our good work pledge. So as a north of Tyne, we have now agreed, and we're getting early adopters on board, our good work pledge. And it requires companies to sign up to not exploiting their workers. So decent pay, a real living wage, not just the minimum wage, no exploitative contracts like 0-hour contracts or anything like that. It requires them to sign up to progression in the workplace, so people have an opportunity to not just be, you know, sort of dead-end fodder jobs, but so that they can get extra qualifications, extra opportunities, so they can earn more in the future, be more productive. It requires employers to engage, and this is a real jewel in the crown for me, that employers have to have a trade union recognition agreement in place. So this is more than the minimum. You know, you must allow, you know, employees to join a union. Well, legally, everybody must, even though a lot of employers don't. But this, they must actually have engaged with the union and have a trade union recognition agreement in place. And that is the strongest of anything, anywhere in this country. I'm really proud we've done that. And there's other things, mental health support, you know, social responsibility in terms of engaging with the community. And so that when we get this cycled all the way through, the only people who'll be able to get any public sector contracts in the Northeast are people who've accepted that this is what good employment should be. Now, I would love it if we could have the power to say you have to have a social license to operate. I'm not going to get that power. And if I take that route, and, you know, some MPs on some campaigns are on the right to do it, but we're not going to get that anytime in the next 5 years, maybe in the next 10 years. So, you know, I'm doing what we can do and get on with now. And that's what you've got to be as a socialist in capitalism.
There's a lot of waste, isn't there, in capitalism at the moment? I think people don't really understand what privatisation of our public services actually is. So when people talk about privatising the NHS, they're not actually talking about making us pay for it yet. They're talking about making the government pay for it, and then getting big private firms to make a massive profit out of that and get a poorer service. I mention this because I have been made aware of something that might be going on in your area to do with supply teaching agencies. Are you allowed to talk about that at the moment, or is that something that you're trying to
get around? There's one of the problems you find is when you're in office, there's an awful lot of rules and regulations applied to you. And some things are commercially confidential. What I can say is, certainly as long as I don't mention anybody's name or corporate name, that it's the case that teachers, you wouldn't think, are the sort of people who are on 0 hours contracts, but a lot of them are. Supply teaching is a big thing. And this causes problems. Not only are the teachers poorly paid, you know, frequently it's the case, for example, that a school can be paying 250 quid a day to get a teacher, supply teacher, and the teacher's getting anything between sort of 60 and 98 quid a day. You know, and the rest of it is administration costs, but profit, really. So you can get better value for the schools, for the public money, but also teachers who are in insecure employment like that, they don't get a pension. Crucially, they don't qualify for professional development, continuous professional development, so they can't go on the courses, they can't keep up to date, which affects ultimately the kids' education, because you're getting teachers who might not have updated something after years. So we've come together with the teaching unions, we've done the feasibility study, which says there's a model that works, And we're now getting, and it needs the unions on board, it needs the teachers on board, and it needs the schools on board. You've always got to build a coalition, you've got to take people with you. And that, though, will get us to a position where supply teaching is owned, not by private companies who are looking to rake a profit, some ethically, or at least above board, some, with dodgy practices. There's always variations. But this would be the schools, us, the public sector, and the teachers themselves, the workers, working together, owning that business. And that is actually pretty much a definition of socialism, isn't it? I won't be able to do that on everything, but where we can do it, we're getting cracking on it.
That would be welcome news to so many supply teachers, because they really, over the past 10 years, their rights have been eroded so badly through agency work. And not all agencies are bad by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of them are. And I know of agencies that are making their employees not only pay employees national insurance, but employers national insurance. So they're actually not contributing anything at all back towards the system. It's a real worry.
It's if anyone's watching who is a teacher who's interested in this, get in touch with, whether it's through the NEU or the NASUWT locally, or even other education workers. It's not always just teachers that are affected by this, through Unison as well, because they're looking for people who want to champion this.
Yeah, certainly. Like I'm an ASUWT myself, and I know that we'll be as long as everything's looking good, I'm sure that so many of our members will be fully behind this. And
we've
really
done the study, the numbers add up. It's now just getting people together to make it happen.
Absolutely brilliant. So what other things have you got in the pipeline? So what are the plans for the next few years?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, we look at I'm just gazing out the window there. We've done a review of the economic situation we faced that's caused, we say it's caused by COVID. COVID's triggered it, but all this fuel was lying around. COVID's just lit the spark. We've been running our economy on a just-in-time basis. We've been running it where there's no slack in the system, where everything has been designed for efficiency. But efficiency can mean many things. And what efficiency means is the maximum return for the money you've employed, by and large, not the best use of people's time, not the best use of natural resources, and certainly not the sustainability for either the people involved, we've got a mental health crisis, and certainly not the sustainability of our environment. So we need to be moving our economy towards resilience. That means things like shortening supply chains, because we've seen even countries that didn't close down with coronavirus, like Sweden, they didn't have a lockdown at all. Their factories shut the same as ours because they couldn't get the parts, because when things are getting shipped halfway around the world, these supply chains are vulnerable. And COVID's going to be rumbling on because we've made a total mess of the testing system. But also we're going to see changes over the next decades, much, much worse in terms of climate impacts. Storms knocking out areas being susceptible to drought and wildfire and a whole range of other things, refugee crises. And so we need a much more robust and resilient supply chain in our economy. So that's a big piece of work. All of the community wealth building, it's including the bank, which I'm sure people have heard about, the IPLIS. We've done the work, the numbers add up. We've now got to do the market testing to get the bank, People's Bank in the Northeast, owned by us, the people, not by the North of Tyne Combined Authority. It will literally be owned by the people who are its customers, local businesses, local people. All of these sorts of things, which keep the money in our region. We've got two big problems in the Northeast. One, we never get enough investment. Two, skilled people have to leave to further their careers, and we need to fix both of them. And a lot of these come down to not getting the investment we need because we're too far away from London. The bank can help that, but I also want to set up a regional wealth fund. Yeah, I've no immediate prospect of that happening, but I'm working on it. And that would require government giving us borrowing powers at base rate so we can invest in our local economy. If we do that, if we can invest in businesses, then we take an equity share of these businesses. They're happy because they've got money to expand and grow and they create jobs and they're doing ethical things. We're happy because you, me, and everybody watching this owns those businesses and a share of it. So the profits are coming back to us. Not in a way of controlling them, not in a centralized way, but in a way of making this a much more participatory socialist economy. And you know what? Even if you don't like socialism, you can take the word socialist out. It's a strong, local, supportive economy. But that's when it comes back to what I think socialism means. So there's these sorts of things. We need to be getting a lot more fiscal devolution. That's a complicated set of things that policy won't talk about. But basically, some people, almost all the tax that you and I pay gets shipped off to London and we get some of it back. I don't want to be taxing people here anymore. What I want is just to have the powers to get taxed differently, such as when we're paying through our taxes for a new train line, metro line, wherever it might be, the land value around it shoots up. You know who makes the money? Developers. Developers who, if they're paying tax, it's not coming to local people. Some of them are very honourable, many of them aren't and engage in all sorts of dodgy practices. And so what we'll be able to do is, as the land value uplifts, we get to keep it to fund those investments in the first place. So it's not taxing the people anymore. It's just basically making developers and corporate finance pay the taxes it should be in the first place. And you know what? I've got Tories supporting this now because it's such an obviously good local idea. You know, I've kept the word socialist out of it because I want their support, but basically that's what it is, isn't it? Socialist idea. You know, if the public does something, everyone should benefit, not just a rich few. So there's all these sorts of things. Now, that's a long journey and a lot of work. The crisis we're facing with coronavirus is huge. And it's happened because we've been running the economy hot. There's no slack in the system. There's no resilience. And so that's what we've got to fix. And in the immediate thing, we're protecting jobs. I've brought jobs here, brought very few here, directly through personal intervention, through the funding that we've made available through the North of Tyne. That's 1,000 jobs in the North of Tyne that wouldn't have been here otherwise. They would have gone somewhere else. We're working with big corporates like Procter & Gamble. Not a massive fan of big corporates, but a lot of the people working for them are very good people with very good ideas. And they came to me and said, look, Jamie, this is the local team, not the globals, and said, we saw your manifesto and it's really big on green stuff, and we are. We've got this idea, and look, I want to kind of get our company to invest, but they won't unless we do something together. And said, my colleague said, there's no point in talking to you because anything with local government, it takes years. And we sorted it out, and within a few months back, this was earlier this year, and then we signed it off a month ago, last month in our cabinet, and that's going to bring jobs, not just good jobs, really high quality scientific technical jobs, developing things that are going to allow us to wash clothes using water at lower temperature, less water. All of these things have big environmental effects, and it's going to be made available to startups who want to share this technology or use this facility. It couldn't be better for the region. So that's the sort of approach we've got to take. So yeah, keep me busy.
So it's like that socialism as collaboration again, isn't it? It's like a really big part of it. I just wanted to ask something here. We've put the government have put in a lot of money into the furlough scheme and what have you. Is that a form of socialism to you?
That's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, technically, of course, it is. It's not substantially different from the way the Soviet Union might have operated. What it isn't is democratic socialism in any sense whatsoever, and nor is it actually particularly fair. Because if you didn't happen to qualify for it, you really struggle. There's a lot of smaller self-employed people in business have struggled, and they're workers like anybody else. So the socialism that I want is a very, some people call it a libertarian socialism. It's a socialism that's about putting people first. It's about local involvement. It's about getting decision-making down to the lowest possible level. So even the way we run the North of Tyne Combined Authority, if it's something in a particular area, I'll let that local authority lead on it rather than me leading on it. So, there's a lot of people in the Northeast worried about, the mayor will control us and things like that. No, that's not the truth at all. So it is about that subsidiarity. We're getting communities involved directly in developing a lot of our projects where it affects communities. So that democratic element is crucial. So the government is spending a lot on furlough. And yeah, you've absolutely, when a crisis like this hits and you've got people, risking not being able to pay the rent, pay the mortgage, you've got to protect people. Have they handled it well? Have they got a plan for withdrawing it? No. You cannot continue to run an economy where effectively you're paying people not to work because you might not run out of money. You can always create more money through quantitative easing and other things like that. What you need, those people doing the work, those jobs were producing something. So what we need is the economic stimulus has got to be about creating jobs. So that's why when Rishi Sunak last month published his plan for the meal deal and the Kickstarter scheme and all of these things, I said that what we need is if they just tell us that all of this wind turbines that are going to be built in the North Sea, in the Dogger Bank, just say, enforce that rule that says 60% has to be built locally, and we can create thousands of jobs along the Tyne and the wider northeast. Let us free up the licenses for undersea exploration of polymetallic nodules. Don't worry about the detail, but that creates thousands more jobs in supply chains in the northeast. What you should have done, what you could have done, Rishi, is said that me and each of the other Metro Mayors, there's £500 million, Jamie, go and build me thousands of affordable, eco-friendly houses. Because at the end of that, you've got the houses. That's a real thing. It's worth something that people can live in. Solves the housing crisis, helps us with the environmental crisis, and creating jobs for people. But no, we'll only work through businesses. We'll only work through particularly bigger businesses, and we'll give them money in the hope that it works. There's an alternative. There's a much better alternative. So, yeah, it's kind of they've blurred the lines. And they've shown that, all this deficit austerity stuff that Osborne and Cameron went on about was rubbish. And they've shown that the state can intervene, and that's broken a lot of the rules of their mindset. But is it going to do what we need it to do? No, it's not, because ultimately it can only happen if you involve people on the ground.
So I think they've always been able to intervene, and we've always seen them intervening for things like war and creating money. They've never seen where's that money come from. I know that you're a little bit interested in modern monetary theory. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, and do you subscribe to that point of view?
Yeah. Well, modern monetary theory is just a theory about how the economy works. So if you have a central bank, Britain's currency is controlled by the Bank of England. It's not controlled by the European Central Bank or anyone like that. Which means that if we want more money, we can create more money. It doesn't have to come from anywhere. The risk is if you just keep creating money to do nothing, like if you're on the furlough scheme forever, then you would end up with loads of people doing that. You collapse in production, increase the money supply, and you get a lot of inflation. But if you use that money to pay people to do something useful, you end up with something at the end of it, whether it's wind turbines, producing our electricity cleanly, whether it's more educated and healthy people. So that's a lower cost on the public purse going forward. Or creating some houses for people to live in. Well, inflation doesn't go up because you've got something real there, or increased productivity as a result. So the money supply always increases over time. Why are we waiting for financiers to get together in order to support a business that's got a brilliant idea in the north of Tyne, in order to create can we not just do it and let them get on with it? It's a much better way.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that explained modern monetary theory the best was the idea of what comes first, tax or spend. Well, if it isn't spend coming first, then where did the money come from to tax in the first place? And I think that explains it really, really nicely. So I want to just move on to one final thing. So this is about hopes for the future, and you've set out a really hopeful vision there, in spite of everything that's going on. And I actually think that a lot of your interview has already answered a lot of this question about how we go on. But how do we win hearts and minds? How do we get people to agree to these socialist principles in life? And I also want to reference as well your absolutely brilliant book, The Way of the Activist, that you did with Rachel Broadbent, which I'm currently reading at the moment. I'm really interested in the psychological side of it. I actually think that the Conservatives are using psychology incredibly well in their message, and they're really tapping into some of the more baser instincts of people. So how do we go about sort of using psychology to the advantage of a society that shares more and cares more for one another?
There's a wonderful book, very short book, very ancient book called The Art of War by a Chinese general called Sun Tzu. And he makes the point that you should never let your opponent choose the battlefield. And that's the mistake that's often made. So, when people say, oh, but what about tax and inflation? Oh, but what about, you say, no, what this comes down to is the future of your kids. We haven't spoken at length today, Paul, about the climate emergency. It's severe. Everything we've seen with coronavirus, everything we saw with the financial crash is going to be as nothing compared to what's going our way. So people's lives and their offspring, their kids, their grandkids, the future of our civilization is at stake here. So, you know what? Do we really think that Facebook are going to pay their taxes in this country? Do we really think that Amazon are? You know, is this the way we want to be going? Do we want to be making money by, or are the jobs of our kids going to be selling coffee to each other? Or are we going to need some good quality jobs that pay well and are producing something real? And you get people into thinking about these things that they can imagine, not concepts, not abstract arguments. You know, when you go to work, are you not a bit pissed off that you have to sit in a traffic jam? Yeah, I am. Right, but I'm not going to cycle. I'm not asking you to cycle. What I'm saying is if we had a better bus service by rearranging the bus gates and the junctions so that you could get there and didn't have to park, you know what? And you could take an e-scooter to just do the last few hundred meters. Wouldn't that be a better system? Oh, it would, yeah. That's socialism, isn't it? Right, yeah. You know, do we want our local businesses supported? All of these sorts of things, you get them in. That's how you win people around. Things that are going to make a difference. You can talk about abstracts, but worse still, in politics, those of us who are involved in it have a habit of getting wound up by little things. You know, when people have had a go and it's just not true, and we know it's not true. We know the Labour Party isn't you know, this horrific hotbed of racism. And yeah, but out there, people we're talking to, people who want to win over, they want to know is life going to be better for my kids than it is for me? You know, and if you don't have kids, am I going to be secure in my old age? And that's what matters. And that's actually what we should fix. And that's what everything brings together. Because unless we have a society that's run with the needs of people in mind, rather than run some abstract where, oh, well, if a foreign rich bloke makes loads of money, obviously we're going to be better, or a British rich bloke for that matter, and we're all going to be better off. Yeah, no. Let's actually take control and do it ourselves.
That's a really positive, inspirational message. So I'm going to say thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. I realise you're an extremely busy person and you're doing a really good job up there, and you're an inspiration for many people who want to have this fairer society that we keep talking about, and it seems further and further away at times. But having spoken to you today, I feel it's a little bit closer than I feared it might have been. So thanks again, and I would like people to like, share and subscribe to the channel, please, if you've enjoyed this video. And thanks again to you, Jamie.
Cheers, Paul.